After the tune, a conversation with Amanda Mathieson of Biorbic on escape rooms for science communication and engagement.
Evolution,
communication,
cognition,
conservation,
behavior,
primatology,
typically primates.
Become the monkey.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Primate Cast. I'm your host, Andrew McIntosh of the Weiler Institute, Calgary Zoo. And for this podcast, it's my job to chat with experts in primatology, wildlife science, and beyond, and share their stories with you. Before getting into today's show, I want to take a moment to thank Rhizam and Sleuts. That's with a $sign at the end there to indicate something I can only guess at. Sorry about that. But they each left comments about the show. Posting on Spotify, Rhizam says, "An excellent podcast from an excellent, verbose, and well-read human being. Looking forward to hearing what the new iteration of the podcast looks and sounds like." I'll take that verbose comment as a compliment rather than a veiled criticism, but you and me both in the future of the show there. And Sloot $sign adds on Apple Podcasts, "Always fantastic guests, well-spoken and informed host, thoroughly enjoy the podcast for many reasons." I love it. And I couldn't agree more about the guests. They're absolutely the reason a show like this can exist. And I have a large amount of gratitude for their time and willingness to share their stories with me. So thanks to you both for sharing those reassuring comments. And I'm looking forward to reading and seeing more from you out there in the days and weeks to come. So if you're listening, please get out there and post something about the show. And while you're at it, if you're able to, I'd be extremely appreciative of your financial support as well. Either through a small donation or a low-fee monthly membership. You can find links in the podcast show notes or on the website at either theprimatecast.com or theprimatecast.info. But it's because of supporters like you that the Primate Cast can have an exciting future. But I do need your help to keep sharing these informational and inspirational stories with the world. So I sincerely thank you for all your support. Now to the interview. Today's conversation is going to be with Biorbic's Head of Public Engagement, Education, and Communications, Amanda Mathieson. I met Amanda in November 2023 at the annual Japan SciComm Forum conference that year. For anyone who's interested, you can check out the JSF website at japansci.com to learn more about what they do. But their annual conference is a great chance for science communicators in Japan to get together and share their activities, all in English. I was invited that year to give a workshop on podcasting for science communication at the event. I've done a lot of public speaking in my time, teaching at universities, presenting at academic conferences. I was recently even joking with a coworker about the time I filled in for a MIA auctioneer to sell art at a Canadian Parks and Wilderness Gala in support of nature protection. I'd even run or co-run a science communication workshop for grad students at Kyoto University for something like 12 or 13 years, but this was the first time I'd represented the Primate Cast and shared tips and tricks for science podcasting with a group of science communicators. I had so much fun there. And I think what really stands out about science communicators in general is just how important we all think sharing our excitement for science is with the public. And it kind of helped that 2023's conference was also based in Okinawa at the Okinawan Institute for Science and Technology, or OIST. And that was just such an incredible setting for the event. But Amanda was there visiting Japan from her home in Ireland, and she gave a really stimulating talk. It was a lightning talk, so quite short, on science escape rooms. I fell in love with that idea right away and made a point of inviting her on the show to talk more about it. In addition to her role at Biorbic, which, by the way, she'll introduce in the interview, so I won't introduce now, Amanda's also a coordinator for STEAM Summer School, which provides practical training in communicating science through the arts. And it's based in Malta. Again, like really incredible setting there if you check out their website. But she's also currently doing a PhD on play at University College Dublin's Earth Institute. So Amanda's had a really interesting career path, and I wanted to flesh that out a bit in the conversation to help any aspiring science communicators find their way forward. But I really think that the idea of escape rooms, specifically for science engagement, is brilliant, especially now that I'm based at an organization that's literally for communicating science to the public. And of course, doing a lot of incredible conservation work. But in an article that Amanda published in the journal Research for All, titled STEM escape rooms for public engagement, she writes that in an engagement scenario, perceived learning may be more valuable than actual learning. And this relates to self-efficacy and the likelihood of continued engagement. I love this quote and the idea that how we feel about our engagement with scientific information can be so powerful in whether we're likely to engage with such information in the future. The goal is obviously to work toward a more scientifically literate society, and Amanda notes that in the interview, her real motivation is not so much to teach people about scientific facts, but to help them become more scientific thinkers, to look at the world through a scientific lens that will help them discern the world around them in a more critical way. We do land on, of course, some of the specific science-themed escape rooms that she's been part of, that she's designed, helped design, and implement. And you're really going to want to hear about those. And no doubt you'll want to participate as well. But for that, you'll have to look Amanda up yourself or find a science-themed escape room near you. Maybe a primatologically themed one is on the horizon somewhere out there. Primatologists, help me out here. Just promise me it won't have any hyper-aggressive, head-smashing gray gorillas like the ones rampaging around the lost city of Zinj in Michael Crichton's Congo. By the way, that's for Rhizam if you're out there listening. Thanks again for the comment. But Amanda also talks more generally about her role, or the role of play in science engagement more generally. Even learning through video games like Age of Empires and board games like Pandemic or Daybreak. She leaves us with a bit of a teaser about the results of her PhD work, which she's piloting, by the way, in early 2025. So maybe a round 2 interview is definitely in the cards. In the meantime, here's my conversation with science escape room pioneer Amanda Mathieson. Can you just tell me, what is Biorbic?
Yeah, that's a good question. So Biorbic is a research center focused around the bioeconomy. So instead of being a physical center that's based in one location, we're actually a center that's focused around one topic. So we bring together researchers from all across Ireland under this one topic. And the idea is that, if researchers are working kind of in different institutions, but on the same thing, they're maybe not talking to each other as well as they could be. So our centre gives them an opportunity to collaborate much more cohesively, so that it can catalyse those big issues. So our topic is bioeconomy, which most people haven't heard of the word bioeconomy. It's an old concept, but it's becoming increasingly important. So what the bioeconomy is, it's basically all the parts of the economy that rely on biological resources, so plants, animals, microbes. And obviously, right now, our economy is very petrochemical, so we're heavily dependent on fossil fuels. And most people think that's just fuel, transport, and maybe plastics, they might think of that. But actually, it's so much more than that. There's solvents, dyes, it's in our cleaning agents, it's in our, plastic fibres in our clothes, rubber, glues. It's basically in everything. If you were to look at it around this room right now, you'd be really hard pressed to find something that doesn't have a petrochemical component in it. And so that's why we really need a bioeconomy. So obviously we need to rely on the bioeconomy for traditional things like agriculture, maybe medicines, building materials and so on. But the more we can transition away from those petrochemical components to biological ones, things like bioplastic, the easier it will be to move away from fossil fuels. So the bioeconomy is big. It's kind of the new economy, if you like. It's the old economy in a way, but it's also what we need to go back to and develop into a new economy as well.
What is the kind of historical placement of that in Ireland, for example? So, are there specific topics within bioeconomy that are more a focal point for your institution, for the country? And what are the kind of like international trends as well? And is there a lot of collaboration between, is it UCD, I guess would be the right way to say?
Yes. So University College Dublin, UCD is our host institution. So most of the operations team of our research centre is based in UCD. We have a lot of researchers in UCD, but then we have researchers in all the other institutions across Ireland, and we connect them together kind of virtually, but obviously they meet in person and so on. And then the other question in terms of Ireland and its kind of part that it plays in the bioeconomy. Ireland has a really strong agricultural industry. It also has a lot of marine area around it. So the marine industry is quite good as well. And Ireland actually produces a lot of food and agricultural products. So Ireland, I think, exports 90% of its food. So it's a big exporter. So in a way, Ireland's in a really good position to develop a bioeconomy because we've got so much in terms of natural resources that we can rely on. We've got the infrastructure there. So if we were to think of somewhere that could develop these products, take the waste, say, from the agricultural processes and turn that into, glues, dyes, paints, whatever it might be, then Ireland has that wealth of resources as well. So I guess that's why bioeconomy is such a big focus in Ireland. But the bioeconomy is kind of developing everywhere. If you kind of look online, you can see there's now a policy map of countries that either have a policy about bioeconomy, a policy statement, or they're developing one. And it's kind of growing, definitely in Europe, definitely in America. So yeah, it's definitely the future is where it's headed. Yeah.
Okay, so I kind of brought you on the Primate Cast so we could talk about something that I learned about you at a recent conference in Okinawa at the Japan SciComm Forum 2023, which is about escape rooms in science communication. And that'll be like the teaser. We'll get to that in a minute. But I kind of want to work a little bit of the way towards that. So as far as I understand it, you have a background in science communication.
Yes.
But maybe you can, so bioeconomy is now kind of where you're sitting at the moment in your current role. But what was your kind of pathway to becoming a science communicator, and what interested you about that?
Yeah, so I did plant science as an undergraduate. And what really interested me about plant science is there was only 7 people on the course. And there was biology, zoology, there's 80 people. And then plant science, there was 7.
Oh, no.
And there was a lot of plant scientists in the university. So it was the ratio of, teaching staff to students was really good. And, there's lots of jobs opportunities as well. So that's why I kind of got into it. But then what I realized was, as I was studying plant science, whenever somebody would ask me what I was studying, and I would say plant science, they'd be like, oh, so what do you do with that? Is that gardening, or what is it for? And I was like, wow, I mean, only everything, food, fuel, building materials, the oxygen you're breathing right now, everything.
It's ironic because I have a similar story, but it's why do you want to be a primatologist? What are you going to do with that? When are you going to grow up? And I don't really have as many great answers as that.
Right.
They don't give us the oxygen we breathe. I'm sure we could think of some cool things they do, like dispersing the seeds for the plants that you might be really interested in.
Yeah. And obviously we came from them. So,
of course we have the human connection, the primate connection.
Yeah, so really, really important. But yeah, it just kind of shocked me how much of a disconnect there was. And that made me really interested in communicating more about science, because I thought, people need to understand this connection a little bit more and understand more about where things come from and their environment and so on. People need to be more engaged with science, I felt like. So when I finished my undergraduate, there was either the option to do a PhD in something science related, and I'd be stuck in a lab, which is not really where I find suits me very well, or I could, go out and talk to people about science. So I kind of took on a communications role in a hospital for a while. But then University of Manchester, which is where I did my undergraduate, they actually started their first Masters in Science Communication the following year. And I was like, great, that's me. I'll sign up for that. So I did the Masters in Science Communication there. And then I actually was just looking for any job that was science communication related. I'd just come out of university, and you know how it is, just give me a job, let me prove myself. And I found this job in Malta working with Dr. Edward Duca in University of Malta, doing basically EU projects that were focused on science communication. And it was great. There was 2 main projects that I worked on. One was Creations, and that was about bringing art into the science classroom. So there was 16 countries, I think it was, and we were all developing activities that blended art and science, and then trialed them in schools and see if they worked and evaluated them. And then there's a list of all these activities somewhere online on the Creations website now. So that was really interesting. And then the other project was STEAM. And this was about blending the art and science, but this time for science communication and science engagement. So there was kind of two parts to it. One was STEAM Summer School, which is a short, intensive course where we train researchers, educators, science communicators, how to communicate their science through the arts. It's kind of quite theatre and performance based, but basically they come to Malta and we do this training, but the point of STEAM is that you apply the learning as soon as you're learning it. So we might do, say, a section on how to design an activity, and then they're designing their own activity. We might do a bit on communicating and promoting it, and then they're promoting their actual event. So the point is that they arrive, and within 9 days they have to deliver a performance event to a live, real audience that they have to, somehow accumulate. And it's really great. Like, it's definitely intense. People definitely get a little bit, like, they're excited initially, and then they get a bit stressed by like day 7. But then it always goes really well. They always have like a fantastic event, and it's always a different event as well. Like, we've had theatre, we've had food. What was it, like a food? What do you call it now? Like a food taster evening type thing. We had one of those. We had like an alien treasure hunt where like aliens had crashed down to Earth, and they had to like do this kind of treasure hunt mini escape room type thing, which was great. So yeah, it's always really interesting. So that's part of STEAM. And then the other things I was doing with STEAM was developing innovative activities for engagement. So, how can we use arts to really get people engaged with science and broaden the audience as well, because not everybody's interested in science, but if we can kind of blend it with things that people are interested in, then that might open it up to new people who might not be there otherwise. So that's where I started working on things like escape rooms, because escape rooms at the time, they were super popular. I think it was 2016, and they just exploded everywhere and everybody was doing them. And I thought, well, that would be a really great way to engage people with science, because, it's all puzzle based, and surely you can incorporate some science into that. So I thought, that might be a way to make it fun for people to like come and, test their skills at some kind of science challenges in a way that is interesting and has a story around it and has some theatrical elements. So we did the STEAM project there, and then ever since I've just been working in science communication. Sorry, that's a really long-winded answer as to how
perfect.
I got into science communication.
Yeah, and from that, I'm trying to decide whether we jump into escape rooms now or first go back a little bit. But I think I'm going to go back. So I'll apologize to the people listening who want to get into the meat of it. But I'm kind of interested in, so this master's in science communication, this was at the University of Manchester, but now, of course, there are degrees in science communication all over the world.
Yes,
but what were the kind of things that you learned in that program? What was the kind of focus? Did you have some opportunity to do your own projects as well within that master's degree? What did it actually look like?
Yeah, so I will say that it was the first year they were running it. So I think it's probably quite different now, but the place that the department that ran the Science Communication Masters in University of Manchester was the Centre for History of Science, Technology and Medicine. So they had, the teaching staff there were quite well versed in science history. So actually we learned a lot about science history, funnily enough. So there were a lot of modules about that, which I guess wasn't really as what I expected. It wasn't something that interested me as much. It was great stuff, but I wanted to focus more on the practical side. But there was then one module that was more around science communication theory, that got very into social science studies, which for somebody who'd come from a kind of a standard science background, experimental science, life sciences, it was definitely a transition, going from, here's your your method, your results, your analysis, to here's a long-winded, like 8-page like monologue of my theories. That was definitely a challenge to transition to. But I think it's nice to kind of experience both.
Yeah.
And then we did have some more practical sessions where they brought in, say, people who worked in a museum to talk about that. They brought in a journalist to talk about that. And we had a final, you could either do a paper, like a dissertation, or you could do a project. And because I'm very practical, I was like, I want to do a project. I think I did a documentary series about fracking, which was quite in the news at the time, and I wanted to really explore it from an unbiased perspective. Like, in my head, I was very anti-fracking, but I kind of wanted to put that aside and explore, well, what's actually the real science here? What are the pros and cons? Completely taking the politics out of it, and present that to the audience to say, look, here's the facts. Now you make up your own mind. I'm not here to tell you what to think. I'm just telling you what we've discovered in this documentary. So that was my project for that. Yeah.
Did it stay private, or have you tried to distribute that as one of your first SciComm endeavors?
I think it's on YouTube somewhere. I'm not sure if it's private or at the very least unlisted, but it's definitely on YouTube somewhere. Like, if people are interested, I could definitely make it unprivated, I'm sure, at this point. In fact, like, I talked to 3 different academics, and I'm sure they would be more than happy, because they signed up for me to be doing a documentary that could promote their research. So yeah.
Okay. Well, maybe we'll have to unearth that then in the show notes of this podcast at some point. So the theme that seems to be coming up here is you're very interested in getting kind of practical with this science communication and reaching different kinds of targets. So maybe that's the segue into the escape room idea. But when I saw you present at this Japan SciComm Forum in November, it was something that I hadn't thought of ever. I hadn't come across that idea. So it was initially just really drawn to it, thinking, wow, what a wonderful idea, basically, because as you said, it was so popular. I have done one escape room in my life.
Oh, yay.
And it was for a stag night for a friend in Tokyo. And it was, I don't remember the name of the place, but one place in Tokyo. And spoiler alert, we didn't get out. We didn't escape. And I felt, intellectually damaged after that, thinking, here's somebody going from Kyoto University. Maybe I should uphold the reputation of the school and ace this thing. I did contribute, but in the end, we didn't quite make it. But it was neat. It was kind of more historical, like very Japan themed. Some of the activities were piecing together this samurai armor to learn some code for one of the doors. And, so we were kind of in this dusty library type room, and that was really fun. But it hadn't occurred to me that this would also be a great way to engage people in topics that you want to expose them to, like science. So maybe you can kind of walk us through. You already started the story of thinking this was an explosion of escape room around the world, and wow, you thought the same thing. It would be a great idea to push some science themes in there. So what was the process then of thinking about that and actually making something happen? What was your very first science escape room?
Yeah, so I will jump into that, but I just wanted to also touch on what you said about, you were thinking, I work at a university, I should be able to beat this escape room. I think that's what most people assume, but actually what I really like about escape rooms is it really levels the playing field. And sometimes, the people who you expect to do well actually find themselves going down different tangents and rabbit holes that waste time, and then other people are able to do better. And there's more, it's more than just intellect. It's also like organization of the team, and being able to spot things quickly and see patterns and things like that. So it's more than just academics, which is nice. And I think that kind of gives people a chance to excel at something that is science-based, but they might think, oh, wow, I did that. I beat that, even though I wouldn't consider myself a sciencey person. In fact, we had, so I did an escape room where there was a puzzle about bioplastics. And at the time, it was during the pandemic, And I was working at Biobic, so we have like a lot of kind of props that we used to use for engagement purposes. And I found this like molecule. I had no idea what it was, but I thought, oh, well, that'll look nice for like decoration or something. So I put it there. And then there was actually a scientist who did the escape room. It was all online. It was on Zoom, because it was during the pandemic. And she spotted the molecule and she was like, that's a bioplastic polymer. So there must be something to do with that. And I was sat there thinking, it's got nothing to do with that. And she wasted so much time on it. And I was like, oh, I feel really bad. But in the same time, that's really cool that, like, you know, because you would think, oh, she's bioplastic scientist, she would know and then do it really quickly. But yeah, it can end up causing detriment sometimes. So
well, first of all, thank you for letting me off the hook with that. And second of all, I'm going to say that there was probably a monkey somewhere in a picture in the escape room, and I got too distracted.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's what you'll say.
I couldn't pry my mind away from that, so I went down the wrong rabbit hole.
You were too academic.
Yeah.
But yeah, so how did they come about? So the original escape room was way too elaborate. Like I was way too ambitious. It was what I really wanted to do was bring young people onto the campus and get them kind of used to the campus and make it a more familiar environment. So my idea was, it was actually a pandemic, and this was before COVID. So just my little hipster before it was cool. But yeah. So it was a pandemic. The idea was that there was a neurotoxin in the shrimp in the bay. You know the movie The Birds, which Alfred Hitchcock.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah, exactly. So that actually, he was inspired because there was a neurotoxin in these shrimp that don't really affect the shrimp, but when the birds eat the shrimp, they go crazy. And so he saw all these birds going wild, and that's how he came up with this idea for that movie. And so I was thinking maybe I could have like a zombie thing, but actually based on science, where there's something in the water, there's some kind of neurotoxin that is getting into people's drinking water. And because Malta actually filters a lot of its marine water because it doesn't have much groundwater. So the idea was that there's a neurotoxin, it's getting into people's drinking water and it's turning them into zombies. And so you have to come to the university, you're invited by your colleague to come and help discover what the cause of this is. And the first puzzle was like a biology puzzle where you had to analyze a Western blot and figure out where this what this pathogen was getting into, which had the neurotoxin in it. And then once you'd solved that, the internet went down because obviously everything was going crazy. So then you had to go into another room, into a server room, to then solve an IT puzzle to get the internet back online. And then you had to go to the chemistry lab to figure out how to purify some water so that you would have drinking water for your escape. And basically you were going around the whole university.
Wow.
And it was so elaborate. It was, every room had to be like completely set up in terms of props to make it look good. So that was a lot of effort. And then if you can imagine, you've got players going around these rooms, and each room has to be reset. So we had like people kind of hiding in the hallways, and as soon as like somebody had solved a puzzle, okay, like run in and reset that room, but don't be seen by anybody, So it was quite elaborate, and in the end we couldn't get many people through the room, through the puzzles, because we had to space them out so much.
Yeah.
So after that, I really narrowed it down into one room. And we actually did it at Science Centre. They gave us 2 rooms to borrow for the space of a week or so. And we ran 2 identical rooms concurrently. And that I would recommend, because then you could get more players through.
Yeah.
But that was a space station. And so you were, basically there was scientists up on a space station. They'd all died. And you had to go up and basically figure out what had happened to the scientists. That was a really fun one. We had like a video. One of our colleagues was one of these like head of the space agency who was like briefing you on your mission. So they had to watch this video and then they would go up in the elevator and that would be the space shuttle. So yeah, it was really fun. We also had like a plot twist at the end that one of the scientists was actually alive and had murdered all of the other ones. And if you didn't figure this out in time, he set off a gas leak to kill you. So basically, if you didn't solve the room in time, we had this fog machine that we would put just under the door, and all of this like smoke would come in, and the actor would like run to the door, and like it wasn't locked, but they would pretend like they couldn't open the door, like, oh my God, we're dying.
Now I know you had also some pretty young participants.
We did, yeah.
Hopefully no children were traumatized during the making.
They loved it. They loved it. In fact, like there was the murder weapon was these two. What was it? Like syringes of these chemicals. And as soon as one of the kids discovered it, they like stuck it into the actor and murdered the actor. So they loved all the brutality of it, actually. Like they were having such a good time.
The kids of today.
Yeah, so that was fun because when they come out, we're like, oh, did you survive? And the actor was like, they survived, I didn't. So yeah, that was fun.
To me, the actor is like a really interesting piece of this as well. So maybe later I'll ask you about scaling, like how this kind of thing can scale more broadly. But I think if I read correctly, the actor that you had is somebody with like some improvisation background as well.
Yeah.
So how do you find that person and make that kind of work for these escape rooms and then just kind of more generally?
Yeah, I think it has to be somebody who is from an arts background or has some experience of that. Like usually I actually look at local improv groups, and there's people who do improv because they love it. That's the thing they like to do in their spare time anyway. And usually I bring them on board, and it doesn't really matter if they don't understand the science, because a lot of the time they're not meant to understand things, because obviously you don't want them to give it away anyway. So the less they understand, the better.
Right.
Usually there's some kind of story. So the actor in the space station, for example, was the engineer who had almost died, but had amnesia basically, and had a foggy head. And really didn't understand what had happened. And they were like, sometimes they would kind of nudge people in the right direction if they really struggle. They'd be like, oh, I feel like I remember something about X. And then that would kind of help people along. So the actor is there to kind of provide a buffer, basically. Some people are really good at science or interested in science, or they feel like a sciencey person, and they're doing well. In fact, scratch that. Can we delete that bit? Some people are really good at escape rooms, and they're really good at solving the puzzles, and they're going through them really quickly. Other people, they get kind of stuck, or they might get intimidated by the science, and they might pause. That might stop them in their tracks a little bit. So the actor is there to kind of provide that buffer for people who might be struggling a little bit too much. If they're just given a little nudge in the right direction, then all of a sudden they get the ball rolling, and then they build confidence, and then usually after that they do really well. So I think it's important to have the actor for that, especially with these science-based escape rooms, in case people are like, oh, that looks like an equation, I don't know. I don't know if that's for me. But yeah, and they also really help in terms of, like you say, the theatrical elements, making it a big memorable experience. Like I say, these little improvised things, like when the young girl kind of killed the actor with the syringes. These little kind of impromptu things that you wouldn't have otherwise makes it a unique experience for them. So I think that's really good. And also, if you've not got a professional budget to do these escape rooms, they're not permanent structures either. You're kind of doing them just as an engagement piece. Often you don't have like high quality props and things like that would maybe stand kind of kids messing about with them too much, or drawing on things and things like that. So having an actor in the room is really good as well if you want to protect some of your materials. Like the actor, for example, can say, we're not allowed to touch those because of Y reason. Like one of my escape rooms is about time travel, and the actor is basically the head of this time traveling team. They're going back into the past to solve research about climate change so that climate change doesn't happen in the future. So one of the lines that he always used to use was, "Oh, let's not touch too many things because, we don't want to affect too many things in the future."
Right.
So yeah, you can usually, the actor's really good at improvising things and making it work when there's certain, constraints. So I would recommend having a good story, a good actor, because then you can get over those limitations quite easily.
So these, what you were just talking about, these escape rooms with the space station, they were done at a science center in Malta.
Yes.
I believe.
Yeah.
And so you had this, I guess, a good audience of people coming with some interest in the science center itself, but not necessarily a strong interest in any specific science or even in science. And I know that one of the, I'm just referencing now this paper that you wrote, STEM Escape Rooms for Public Engagement, in the journal Research for All, where you have this quote, which is really great. In an engagement scenario, perceived learning may be more valuable than actual learning. And as this relates to self-efficacy and the likelihood of continued engagement, which I found really interesting, because I think a lot of times we think of science communication as, a way to kind of impart knowledge, but actually what might be more important is that how people feel about science and their experiences. And then maybe that, could kind of open a door to future learning opportunities, even if this learning opportunity wasn't, the most kind of fact gathering of exercises, which again, might not be the goal. So I wonder if you could just talk about that a little bit.
Yeah, I really do strongly believe that. I think, for people who may not be as engaged with science, just even just doing something that's science-based is different for them, So, and a lot of the times I think with engagement activities, like you say, we're trying to impart knowledge and, say at a science festival, you might be like imparting all of these facts on a person, but that's like the maybe the 10th stand that they've been to that day. And how much of that information are they really going to retain? These short-term interventions that we have, we only get a short amount of time and there's so much going on in people's lives. So for me, I think what's going to have more of an impact is having some kind of really positive experience, establishing some sort of positive association or memory in somebody's mind that, oh, that was really fun, and the more we can make science fun and interesting and have those positive associations and even build people's confidence, like, oh, I did a science escape room and actually I beat it and actually my score was quite good. The more we can build that, the more I feel like they're more likely to seek out other engagement opportunities. So I think, you have your kind of preaching to the choir audience who are already interested, and probably they are going to remember things because they're already building their science knowledge through all of these other, they might watch science documentaries, they might read popular science books and so on. But if it's just like that snapshot, you've got an hour with this person who never does any science otherwise, just building that positive memory, I think, is a really good thing, because then they might be like, oh, there's a science thing on. I enjoyed the escape room last time. Let's go and check that out. I think that's what we can do is do that, because not everybody, I don't think everybody can be interested in everything, but we can at least appreciate things and be engaged with things. And when we see, science in the news and things like that, if we have a positive association with, yes, I like science, I like scientists, I don't know much about it, but I'm sure they're doing a good job. Like that in itself is important as well, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on where you are. At this SciComm forum that came up in the panel discussion that we had about the fact that, I think you asked the question actually, about if SciComm in Japan doesn't have a long history, why is it that people are so... I mean, pro-science is maybe the wrong way to think about it, but why is there so little kind of anti-science or anti-scientist rhetoric within the society? And I think that's true. People do tend to think that the information that's being generated by science is probably pretty robust, and there's much less kind of bad sentiment towards it. But that's not obviously the case everywhere.
Exactly.
Yeah, and so I kind of wonder, maybe with that as a background, like, in the examples you've given so far, we had the space station issue of trying to figure out what happened to all these scientists. You have this time travel. You have the figuring out a pandemic cause and sorting that out. That became very important now that we're in a pandemic. But do you have any learning targets as well when you design these escapes? So maybe there are things, you started this interview by talking about the bioeconomy and what BioOrbic's kind of role in that is in disseminating information and facilitating research, collaborations. But are there any examples then of whether it's escape rooms or something similar where you actually have specific learning targets or outcomes that you want to kind of influence sentiment around?
So that's a really good question, actually, because actually all of my escape rooms do have learning outcomes, even though it's not so much about the facts and the figures. They all have key messages, and that's what I really want people to take away. You know, similar to kind of TED Talks where you're trying to get a message across, a key message. And I think if you have a key message in your escape room, that's the thing that can really last and have an impression on someone. So, for example, with the climate-themed escape room, you know, they're from the future where the climate crisis wasn't resolved. And they're living in a horrible, horrible environment. You know, there's very little food, there's very little nature around, there's not so much green things, the weather's atrocious, there's wars, there's fighting. And the only thing they can do at that point, because things are so terrible, is to go back in time to where we are now and to finish off this research so that they can figure out how to resolve it so that the future is bright. And the message of that is that we're in this time now. Like, we do still have time to figure things out. So that's what I want people to take away, is that we need to act now because we don't want that future. Yeah. And a lot of the puzzles, they are based on real research projects. And even though I think in an escape room, you know, you're kind of under time pressure and you just want to figure things out, it's really difficult to take things in that way, in that kind of environment. But at the very least, it can be a prompt for discussion afterwards. Yeah. So often what we do now in our escape rooms is afterwards we'll have a discussion with people and we'll talk about those puzzles. So, for example, there's a puzzle where we're talking about farm biodiversity and they have to figure out how to increase the biodiversity of this farm. Afterwards, we sit down and we talk about, so did you know anything about farm biodiversity, you know, before you saw that? And that can kind of then cement a bit more of the learning, the message of the research. Sometimes we even have the researchers present to talk about some of the puzzles, which is really nice as well. And that adds an element that you wouldn't get in a normal standard escape room. And I think as well, it kind of is a good way to build people's curiosity, because if you just go up to people and say, hey, can I tell you about my research? You know, it's like, why would I be interested in that? But then if they do an escape room and they have some reason to be intrigued by it, you know, we just did a puzzle, then it's, you know, can I tell you what's behind that puzzle? Mm-hmm. Then they've got a link to it. They've got a reason to be like, tell me about it. What was that about? So I think it's a good pathway to kind of making it more coming from them, the questions, rather than us kind of forcing the information onto them as we're sometimes wanting to do.
Yeah, for sure. No, it's brilliant. And, you know, yesterday I was with my daughter in a shopping center and just checking out a hobby store, and I noticed they had on the shelf this Origin of Species board game. Yeah. And so I know that in, I don't know, the last decade, you see this kind of proliferation of those kinds of, gamifying knowledge or knowledge acquisition or the process of learning science, which seems really exciting. I don't know if that game itself is that great. I've seen various ones that are similar with conservation messages or with biodiversity messages, or just other things, space-themed things, time-themed things, whatever. Yeah. But they all look pretty fun. Do you have any, by the way, any science board games that you recommend that you've played?
I think there is one about the pandemic. Yeah. Maybe it's called Pandemic. Uh-huh. And there is one, God, my colleague's going to kill me now because I've forgotten the name of it. There's one about climate change. In fact, I'll tell you afterwards, and you can add it.
I'll add it to the show notes. Yeah.
Yeah. But there's it's quite new, and my colleague's just been sent like a kind of preemptive copy of it.
Oh, cool.
But it's by the same guys that did the pandemic board game.
Right.
So it should be really good, I think.
Yeah. So board games, it seems like it's scalable in a way. If they get some popularity, it's pretty easy for people to pick them up and play them at their kitchen table.
Yes.
With escape rooms, it might be a bit different. But I know you've also experimented with or run them online, and you talked about that during the pandemic. So just for the listeners, what would that actually look like if you were doing an escape room online?
Yeah, so that's actually how we started the climate-themed escape room. We realized, okay, it's going to be on Zoom because that's what everybody's using. It's going to be on some online video conferencing software. So they're not actually going to be in the room. And luckily, as I say, I always have an actor anyway. So I thought, okay, the actor's in the room, they control the actor. How can we explain this? How can we get away with this in the way that would fit into a story so that it still makes it immersive? So that's where the original storyline came from, that the actor is traveling from the future into the past. And they're from the future as well. So basically the actor is the only one traveling into the past, and they're watching him and they're telling him what to do in the past, like giving him and we had some kind of severe jet lag because he's traveled in the past like by decades.
Time lag, yeah.
Yeah, severe time lag. So he's like very kind of, his mind's very foggy at the minute. So that's why you're the research team. You have to help him and tell him what to do. And so, basically they would log in on Zoom and they would ask him to look in a cupboard or try that key or try this. And we wanted to make it a bit more interactive as well. So we would have, we had this AI called SkivvyBot, and SkivvyBot would be able to scan things in the room and digitize them. And obviously this was just like on Google Docs, and SkivvyBot would scan it, quote unquote scan it, but then we basically just drop it into the folder and they'd be like, oh, it's scanned, now we can read this document or we can interact with it. So basically it was just that they would unlock a puzzle in the room and it would be some email or printed email or something like that, and then it'd be scanned and then they'd be able to interact with it on on Google Docs. Yeah.
Okay. With the current level state of IT and AI, it sounds like probably there's so many opportunities here to make this just incredible. But I wonder if, since you've been doing this and now you've published about it as well, have you had people coming to you and asking for like, we think this is a great idea, we want to set up escape room, help us out? Are you doing any kind of consulting for that?
Yeah.
And what kind of ideas are out there that
you know what? It's typical of anything. Like when I had this idea, I had no idea if anybody else was doing it. I thought, oh, I might be the first one to do it. But I'm definitely not. There's other people doing it and doing it in interesting ways as well. Like some of the more interesting ones. In fact, one that's like really low in terms of resources was somebody made a Google form where it was more like a choose your own adventure story. So you select, it's like a Google form where you select multiple choice and then it takes you to a different section based on what you chose. So that's a really easy way of doing it. And then there was one that I really liked it was Imperial College London. Some guys in the chemistry department did something called Breaking Bag, where it was basically, they had a rucksack and each rucksack partition had a lock on it, and you had to solve the chemistry puzzles to get deeper into the bag. So I loved that idea. But yeah, there's so many ways that you can do it, and there's a few people out there. I know that, whenever I've spoken at a big conference like PCST, and I'm there talking about my escape rooms, they lump me in with like one or two other people who are also talking about escape rooms. So I'm like, okay, there's definitely other people doing it then.
That's cool.
Yeah.
Are there any examples of like, whether they're science centers or museums who've kind of done it larger? Who have like exhibits, for example, for escape rooms for science that you know of?
There definitely will be. I know that it wasn't a science museum, it was a history museum, but a history museum put out a tender where they were asking someone to design an escape room for them that would go into their museum as kind of a semi-permanent exhibit or activity. So I would say that they probably aren't the only ones doing it. There aren't particular ones that I know of, but I think definitely, that's something that a science centre could definitely have as an activity. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, so immersive, and you can just imagine with the right kind of funding,
Yes.
kind of amazing
Yeah.
situation. Yeah, super cool. So to all the primatologists out there listening, if anyone has an idea about a primate-themed escape room, you can get in touch with the Primate Cast or Amanda directly and throw around some ideas. Yeah, so that's super fascinating to me. I love these kind of, like I said, it was a bit of an off-the-wall idea to me, but obviously it's being done, it's been done, and I think people are getting a lot of engagement out of it. But I want to maybe transition as we kind of start to close this conversation out to SciComm more broadly. So I know you also, during the pandemic, you started a podcast and
Yes.
it's called SciComm Stories. And so I wonder if you could just talk a little bit about that, and then maybe you can touch on some of the I mean, not in detail, but just some of the things that you learned doing that and from other science communicators.
Yeah, definitely. So when the pandemic hit, I had loads of time on my hands, and like everybody else and their dog, I started a podcast. Basically out of boredom and the fact that I had time. But I also felt like, I feel like I'm really lucky in that I get to go to conferences, I get to travel, and I get to meet people who are doing all kinds of cool things in terms of science communication. Because you see them, whenever everyone gathers at a conference, you can see, oh, this person's doing this in Portugal. Like, when would I ever find out about that? Which is really amazing. And I remember back when I was an undergraduate, I didn't even know science communication was a job. And now it seems to be growing and growing. But at the same time, I think probably a lot of young people maybe don't know that science communication is a job. So what I wanted to do was make it a bit more open and accessible to people. If they can't go to the conferences themselves, maybe they can at least hear from the people who are doing these things. So the point of it was for each episode to interview someone who's done something interesting, something different in terms of science communication, and then just promote that, put it out to more people. And it was really great doing it. I really enjoyed it. I met so many different people through that podcast. I learned about so many cool things. Some of them that come to mind would be there was a guy in Edinburgh who did a science Harry Potter themed treasure hunt kind of thing. So people came to I think it was the Royal Botanical Gardens, and they had Harry Potter themed classes like potions and herbology and care of magical creatures, but it was all, real science based, which was really cool. And I think from that I learned if you take people's fantasy worlds that they're already kind of bought into, like Harry Potter, and combine science with that definitely reaches more people. Then there was another guy in Scotland who does science Cayley, so that's a traditional Scottish dance, and he gets people to figure out a choreography for a dance that will describe some sort of science phenomena. So, for example, a solar eclipse. How can you do a dance that would demonstrate a solar eclipse? Or like maybe it's a metabolic reaction or something. So that was really cool. What else did we do? I'm trying to think of other people that I should mention that. God, it's so long ago now.
I noticed that you had some interviews with folks who were trying to engage people with maths.
Yes.
And I think that's maybe even more so than science. Math seems to be something that so many people, if not most people, have a distaste for.
Yes.
It's very unfortunate. So I know there's, I'm not going to remember her name either, but there was a recent book. The book title is Math Real? And It's a British author and mathematician, abstract mathematician, theoretical mathematician. He's been really taking or making a kind of priority on just getting out that message that math is not as scary as it could be. And, there are all these different ways of teaching it, engaging people with it and understanding it. And it's just really kind of trying to connect with people in different ways so that they lose that kind of fear of it. But I wonder if you have any thoughts on that from you.
Yeah, maths is an interesting one because, people do find it kind of like a bit intimidating sometimes. But there was one guest on the podcast called Katie Steckles. And the way I met her was we were doing this history tour about women who'd contributed to science in some way and were based in Manchester. So this was when I was at the University of Manchester, and she did a portion of the tour about a famous female mathematician. But I just remember that basically so we would pick people up from one location and take them to the next. And she came to pick people up from my location and took them to her location. But she showed them a Rubik's Cube at the beginning when she picked them up. And she was like, by the time we reach the next location, I will have solved this. And we were like, really? And she was just talking, like she wasn't even looking at the thing, I don't feel like. And then by the time we got there, she'd solved it.
Wow. And
then she was doing like some fun, what I would call mathemagic. We had someone actually at STEAM Summer School so as part of the summer school, we do like an open mic night where they can do any sort of form of entertainment for 5 minutes. And one student did mathemagic. So basically like figuring out what number people had guessed in their heads, using all of these like behind the scenes maths, but to you looks like magic. So that's really good. I think that's one way of inspiring people. And another thing that, another activity that I thought was really good was there's a guy in Greece who's doing, Cooking with the numbers it was called. And basically it was for students who are struggling with maths, but like cooking. So you have to use your maths to measure out the ingredients, to figure out the nutrition, to do the recipe basically. And that's another way of like, if you combine something people are confident in and that they like with something that maybe they feel less confident in, I feel like that can be the bridge to getting them over that barrier.
Okay, so I think we can wind this down here, but I have one kind of last question, which is, we've already talked about a whole bunch of different ways to engage people with science. What is it that you're kind of working on right now that you're really excited about? And maybe that involves like a new escape room that you're envisioning or something else?
Well, right now I'm studying a doctorate at Trinity College Dublin. It's in the School of Education, and my focus is play, obviously. I mean, I love escape rooms, I love play. I think play is such a wonderful way to learn. I know that when I was younger, I used to play a lot of video games, and most people at the time especially would say, oh, what a waste of time, spending all evening playing video games. But I learned a lot from those video games. Like there was a pirate game where I basically learned north, east, south and west from that. And you were kind of exploring this map, and the map was quite reminiscent of the globe. So like, you'd have cultures that were a little bit like African cultures in that region. The Far East would be quite similar to kind of East Asian cultures. So I kind of learned a little bit about geography and where these different cultures were from that game. And there was another game called Age of Empires where you had to build your own civilization. And you had to do campaigns as well that were related to history, like the Spanish conquests in America and so on. So I learned a bit of history from that, but also there were skills that I learned, I feel like, or maybe concepts that were a little bit more abstract. So, for example, when I was building these civilizations, you start with just 2 villages and you have to acquire wood, you acquire materials, you build like markets, you build a military base and all of that kind of stuff. And then in history, we had to write an essay, I remember, about World War II from the perspective of the Prime Minister and the government who were running things at the time. And I wrote this essay, and my teacher said it was really great. And they were like, you really understand how to run a country. And I was like, I've run entire civilizations. Like, I've got a load of experience. But like, so I think games can really, really build these skills that you wouldn't, and you have these experiences that you wouldn't otherwise. So I'm really interested in that. And so one of the things I want to do for my project is to develop a game that would teach students how to be scientists. Like if you were scientists and you had to solve all of these environmental issues, like excess plastic, like excess CO2, like biodiversity loss, the planet is in this horrible state. You are scientists. How are you going to fix it? So I want to design a game that secondary school students would play over, say, 10 weeks. And they have to do all the things that scientists do. They have to engage with industry. They have to talk to the public. They have to apply for funding, like all of these different things that you would think are kind of side to the science, but really they're so much part of it. And I want to kind of give them that experience of what it's like to be a researcher. So
I don't know if anyone will have fun with the module on applying for funding.
it will be soul crushing.
Yes. Teach resilience as well in the process.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. Resilience is the whole idea, I think. Yeah.
I mean, it's fascinating. And while you were talking, I was just thinking, one of the most immersive examples of a game that had a crazy outcome, science fiction, Orson Scott Card, Ender's Game. Have you read Ender's Game?
I haven't read it, but I've heard of it. I saw like the end of the movie once when somebody else was watching it, and it looked really cool. So yeah, I would definitely read that.
Yeah, I mean, it's a bit of a spoiler alert, but the whole idea there is this society is looking for the perfect general to destroy this alien race that the human race is at war with. And rather than having, the kind of reveal at the end is that the whole training system that this kid genetically engineered for that purpose, the whole training system that he engaged in was actually the real war.
Right.
So by the end of it, he kind of defeats the game, but actually they defeated the alien civilization.
Wow.
And so I imagine with what you were talking about is kind of like an example of that, right?
Yeah.
How can you get these people to that end point, but the whole time they think it's like this fun kind of game or this experience where...
Yeah.
So that's really interesting, without the kind of dystopic ideas.
That would be more like how do we solve and help the planet rather than how do we destroy it.
Can we put these people in training programs to solve the climate crisis, without knowing that they're actually doing it as they go?
That would be really cool, because you can test things without. Well, yeah, if you were really doing it, I suppose, you can't just just throw this genetic variant out into the world and see what happens.
No, probably not. Yeah, no. But I mean, that sounds really interesting, and I know you're just at the start of that PhD journey right now, but I wish you the best of luck in that. And
thank you. I'll need it.
Maybe we'll have you back on at some point. We can talk about some of the results that you're finding.
Yeah, definitely.
How the games were going. But Amanda, is there anything else that we didn't mention or you want to come back to from this conversation to leave people with?
No, I just want to say thank you for having me on, and just to tell everybody to play more. I think there's so many benefits to it. Not just kind of for your mental health, but also in terms of developing skills, developing knowledge. It's so much more productive than we give it credit for. And it's not just children who should play. We should all play. We should all be playing. Yeah.
Amanda Mathieson, thank you so much for being on the Primate Cast. Wonderful message to close.
Thank you very much.
Thanks for listening to the Primate Cast. The podcast is hosted and produced by me, Dr. Andrew McIntosh, Senior Scientist for Wildlife Conservation at the Wilder Institute, Calgary Zoo, formerly Associate Professor of Biological Sciences at Kyoto University. Join me for new episodes as often as I can get them out on whatever podcast platform you prefer. Leave a rating or a review of the show to help other listeners find it. Connect with me through our website, theprimatecast.info, or social media on X, Facebook, or Instagram. Feel free to comment, ask questions, suggest future guests, or share whatever else might be on your mind. If you value the show, consider donating or becoming a member. You can do so by visiting theprimatecast.info and clicking on the big yellow Buy Me a Mic button, which takes you to our campaign page. Or you could click on that little heart icon next to the social media links in your podcast player, or on the text link in the show notes. Your support will help cover production costs and is essential to ensure that I can continue to produce quality informational and inspirational interviews with leading figures in the field long into the future.